So it's better to say there's no God than to say there is a God. Because whenever man says there is a God, what him trying to do now is make God become like man. So it's a really serious thinking. But I don't know if a whole lot of people didn't know that. If you read the Bible, you know, say Paul, in the Bible, did believe that Jesus Christ was coming back in his time. So did most of the disciples. And I remember one time me and a man catch up in an argument when we had tell him, say, Jesus Christ stand up in front of some people and said, there's many here that shall not see death until the coming of the Son of Man. I don't know if them people are still alive. Them dead. There's many here that shall not see death until the Son of Man come. So there's a lot of people at them times there that actually believe, including Paul. They believe, say, him would have lived to see the coming, the return of the second return of Jesus Christ. Well, it's 2,000 years now gone, and we don't see no Jesus Christ a come. But the philosophy continued. Yeah, this is the Cutting Edge on RFM coming through. As we promised you last week, we want to carry you to the Theological College of the Cutting Edge. Yes, there's a Theological College of the Cutting Edge, you never know. Yeah, man, you tune in to it most nights for about 11 years now. March a come. And we want to play the stage for all the people them who's interested in theology and who's interested in just gathering information and understanding things from another level than what we were taught. You understand? This is about the devil, a very strange subject to tackle on a program in the night here, but we hope that when you hear it, you will gather some information to open your mind and make your consciousness be more clearer in certain little levels. You understand? So, without further ado, we want to present the devil.
This is not a conventional biography, but then the devil is a thoroughly unconventional, many would say unreal character. Even if you put to one side for a moment widespread skepticism about his very existence, Satan is, by any standards, an unusual subject. For a start, he makes Methuselah, at age 969, look like an adolescent. The devil has been around for some 2,000 years in the New Testament, and maybe for a good deal longer in various other guises and incarnations. Indeed, exact details of the birth, parentage, and education of this doughty time traveler are impossible to come by. The devil is very much a part of the Christian viewpoint. Other creeds may have toyed with malign gods and spirits, but none has carved out a similar role, a figure who is the name and the face to put to the abstract reality of evil. On his relationship with the Christian God, reportedly once very close, almost that of a favored son before they had an almighty falling out, it is hard to arrive at an accurate portrait. Are they equal and opposite ends of the spectrum, principles of good and evil locked in a cosmic battle like Batman and the Joker? Or is the devil not a free agent? Is he still in some fashion under God's control? Official theology appears to endorse the second viewpoint, while the practice and iconography of the churches down the ages backs the first. It is just one of the murky areas of ambiguity that confront the biographer. The question of ancestry is another. The devil has no conventional family tree, but does appear to have forebears in the ancient civilizations of the Near East and in Judaism and Islam. None begins to approach his prominence and powers, but the resemblance is too close to be ignored. The notion of resemblance raises another issue. Though his name in all its various forms, Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Belial, and so on, is, after 2,000 years, universally recognized and planted in every dictionary and encyclopedia, his face and even his form remain an enigma. Is he an angel or an animal? The serpent who tempts Eve in the Garden of Eden, the flying pig who was banished from a church by Pope Gregory the Great? Or is he a strange-looking human, the hook-nosed gargoyle on the facade of Chartres Cathedral, the black bewinged imp in Bruegel and Bosch scenes, the fool of medieval mystery plays? The devil, it seems, has 1,000,001 disguises. What are taken as his telltale signs, the horns, the cloven hoof, the tail, the breath that smells of sulfur, the black skin and red eyes, are just several of his many masks. He could be anybody or nobody. That is what beguiles. Reported sightings also trouble the biographer. It is impossible to find independent verification for any of them. Are they, as one scholar remarked, all in the mind? The Catechism of the Catholic Church, published by Pope John Paul II in 1994, makes explicit reference to Satan's continuing role. And exorcisms, expelling the devil from those he has possessed, continue, though at a reduced rate. For the most part, however, mainstream Christianity has passed the devil on to fringe evangelical sects. These new churches, with their tendency to take every word of the Bible literally and their corresponding lack of theological or ethical sophistication, thrive on talk of the devil. If news of the devil's retirement has then been exaggerated in Christian circles, his regular appearances on stage, in films, and even in television advertisements promoting naughty but nice products suggests that secular 20th century Western society still has a place for him, albeit a cameo that hints at an ill-defined force of evil and malice. Demonizing, a process carried out by the Romans on the early Christians, remains one of the blights of a supposedly enlightened and tolerant era. The Nazis built on centuries of demonization of the Jews. Saddam Hussein becomes the devil incarnate, with every act of terrorism in the world laid at his door, regardless of the evidence. The devil is with us and causing trouble. Quite how he does this, or how it is done in his name, is one of the questions that is at the heart of this biography. Not the least among the others is to define the exact nature of the devil's shadowy existence. Does he, in fact, have a physical form? Is he a popular metaphor for the abstract reality of evil? Or is he something between the two? We live in an age that approaches religion and religious belief with skepticism, and places ever greater onus on science to provide the answers to those issues of life and death and destruction that have always perplexed humankind. Even within the churches, doubting Thomases have been elevated from the pitiable to the theologically correct. Yet many scientists will freely admit that they do not have all the solutions, and never anticipate being in a position to replace God. Bereavement, suffering, pain, natural disasters, the various apparently random crises of life remain as puzzling in the late 20th century as they were to the farmers of ancient Egypt, who despaired when the Nile destroyed their crops. In an age where the faith that saw God as a kind of universal Father Christmas has been destroyed, the myths and symbols of religion retain a unique capacity for helping in negotiating and navigating the inexplicable blows of fate. Rites and rituals can still bring comfort and spiritual growth. Among the most enduring features of the Christian landscape is the devil. His realm, granted, has been steadily eroded by science, as many of the phenomena that were once put down to his wicked hand are irrefutably ascribed to other sources. If, for example, a man had collapsed with an attack of epilepsy in the Near East in the 1st century AD, his behavior would have been put down to possession by the devil or his demons, and he would have been exorcised. In the Middle Ages, such a diagnosis would still have held good, but the patient would have been bled as well. Today, the same behavior is understood in terms of an uncoordinated discharge of motor neurons, and the patient is treated with diazepam. Psychiatry now has names and remedies to explain actions that were once simply called evil. It is no accident that the growth of Freudian psychoanalysis in this century has coincided with a decline in formal attachment to religion. Where once people would have sought counsel from their priest in the confessional and succor in the symbols of good and evil in their churches, today they resort to therapy. There are many more natural and moral occurrences that still have no name and no explanation. The word evil is sometimes questioned in relation to such occurrences. It is considered too abstract, too judgmental. Philosophers will argue that ours is a morally neutral universe with neither good nor evil. Yet many can still almost daily point to actions they would deem as evil, from violent crime, child abuse and rape, to acts of terrorism and the development of nuclear weapons. The important thing is that evil, otherwise an abstract metaphysical concept, can be identified. In the modern mind, it is located within each individual, what Jung called our shadow. Historically, the tendency was to place it outside, on the devil, who exploited a weakness in the human makeup. Of the two placements, the contemporary option is harder to deal with, since it imposes a responsibility on each and every individual. The traditional route, while emphasizing that God gave each man and woman free will, the capacity to choose right or wrong, did have the bonus of offloading some of the burden onto an external force. That is why the devil still attracts a following. He represents the easy option when we are confronted with evil. Cave paintings show humankind in conflict with horned animals. Out of such depictions evolved the half-man, half-beast figure of the horned god of the north. This in turn influenced the Teutonic, Norse and Celtic deities, and ultimately the Christian devil. Tracing such links has been one of my tasks. Once good and evil were slotted into the model of some sort of deity, there were then efforts to sort out the exact relationship between the two. Ancient civilizations tended to see them as two sides of the same coin. In Egypt, for instance, Seth and Horus were often worshipped and even depicted together, the generally benign sky god and the usually malevolent god of the desert. The key to a good life was to achieve harmony, or ma'at, between these conflicting forces. The deities of Egypt and of Canaan and the various peoples of Mesopotamia were monist, where only one overall divine principle encompassed within its pantheon both good and bad. Judaism took the monist approach. Yahweh was the almighty, all-powerful one, equally responsible, the Old Testament makes clear, for good and bad events and actions, even at one stage egging Moses on to rape and pillage. This monism began to be eroded in the book of Job. There, Satan makes his first appearance, still very much under Yahweh's wing, as a kind of chief prosecutor at the heavenly court, but at odds with his master over the human capacity to do or be good for its own sake. It was in the apocryphal literature that blossomed between the writing of the final books of the Old Testament and the time of Christ that a sustained challenge was mounted to official monism. For a variety of social, political, and religious reasons to do with the upheavals and disappointments that God's chosen people were experiencing, the figure of Satan, the fallen angel, found a place as Yahweh's rival in a cosmic battle, the scapegoat for the Jews' misfortunes. In a pattern to be repeated throughout history, the Jewish people tried to understand why their God could have abandoned them, and hit upon the wiles and temptations of Satan as the reason. All that was evil or negative in the world was ascribed to this angel of darkness. The devil is second only to Jesus in the New Testament, but distinct and different approaches to the question of good and evil can be seen between the would-be eyewitness accounts in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the more philosophical and Greek-influenced writings of St. Paul, and the colorful and apocalyptic book of Revelations. No single line emerges from the New Testament about Satan, though his status is increased enormously and the official monist line is maintained. The problem was to integrate two apparently contradictory ideas: a God who was all-powerful and all-knowing, and thus who allowed humanity to suffer, and a God who was also apparently all-loving. The 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume summed up the dilemma succinctly when he wrote of God, "Is he willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil?" Whatever the limits imposed by official teaching, the devil became an essential part of the Christian fabric, someone to blame when trouble and dissent cast a cloud, the eternal and convenient scapegoat. When the Reformation shattered the hope of one holy apostolic Europe under the papacy, both sides were quick to see the devil's hand manipulating their rivals. Luther had only to think of Rome to see a hellish city full of demons parading around in the scarlet robes of cardinals, while one of the most popular depictions of the Protestant reformer among Catholics had him listening attentively as the devil whispered in his ear. The devil became synonymous with the deities of any rival creed to Christianity. With the rise of Islam in the 8th century and its spread into continental Europe, and especially into Christendom's lost province, Spain, Muslims were targeted as the devil's disciples. Later, the language of the Crusades, whatever their true political purpose, was all about defeating the infidel and winning back the holy places in Jerusalem from the powers of darkness. The devil was an essential part in putting a face to evil. He was also useful in the Roman Church's attempts to outlaw practices it objected to on moral grounds. Since Augustine in the 5th century, it had enforced a strict code of sexual morality. Those who broke it, and particularly those women who were seen by clerics as following in the footsteps of Eve by seducing men into wrongdoing, ran the risk of being tainted with the devil. The witch craze was part of a long-running conspiracy theory, a collective fantasy particularly prevalent among Christians, though seen in recent times in social workers and therapists who endorse allegations of satanic ritual abuse, that there is a group within society breaking all the rules and subverting all the norms. Since one of the devil's roles down the ages has been that of a revolutionary, he was, after all, the first rebel, his name has become linked with such charges. These usually include nocturnal meetings, symbolizing the path of darkness, not light, inversion of Christian images, orgies, incest, sexual depravity, blood sacrifice. Self-avowed Satanists remain, for the most part, people who are either sick or who feel in some way rejected, marginalized, or cast out by society, and who turn to the devil as a channel to express their own alienation. The search to understand, quantify, and even negate that evil, so much a part of the devil's story, is part of this biography. It makes no pretense to have the answers that have eluded humanity since the beginning. It merely observes the role the devil has played and continues to play in an endeavor to make sense of the inexplicable. People today believe in the devil as a reality, yet those who deny the existence of evil altogether remain a minority. The rest inhabit various staging posts on the way from one position to the other, that there are evil actions but not evil individuals, or that people can be evil but that evil is within them. Such formulas can seem thin and inadequate when faced by daily news reports of terrible and terrifying acts of cruelty and barbarity around the world. Can the hatred that created Auschwitz be found only within humanity? Or is there a greater force of evil out there? The fundamental question of evil remains, and with it, the devil. Though the blackest of black sheep, the devil is seen today as a member of the extended Christian family. Yet the devil, who is such a menacing figure in the New Testament, can trace his lineage back not just to Judaism, but to pre-Christian times and to other creeds and cultures that had an influence on the authors of the Bible. Satan did not suddenly appear from nowhere as a fully grown adult to traumatize Job, tempt Jesus in the desert, and terrorize generations of Christians. There were precedents, parallels, and a universal need for a figure or formula to explain away what might loosely be termed evil. He came from a long line of demons and evil spirits that had fulfilled just such a role for the peoples of the Near East for 4 millennia. While most traditions saw their gods as monist, two-faced, angels of munificence and kindness one minute, and the next, for no reason, demons of cruelty and destructiveness, there was a growing trend in the immediate pre-Christian era toward what became known as dualism. Good and evil were increasingly seen as opposite and even independent forces. Plato labored to separate evil from the creator, body from spirit, the one base, earthbound and morally neutral, the second purer and capable of choosing between good and evil. The Jews, in the wake of their exile in Babylon, followed this fashion for creating separate principles of good and evil. While they were later to revert to a more ambiguous position, officially at least evil spirits have always had a role in popular Judaism, the Christians implicitly enshrined opposite poles of good and evil in their gospel through the character of the devil. In examining the cross-fertilization of ideas between various cultures and peoples, the devil should not be seen as a character invented by one civilization and handed on to others. There are many influences and no single line of development. Therefore, there cannot be a single starting point to this biography. The devil has not one birthplace, but many. As many, in fact, as there were human imaginations trying to understand their existence and their environment. The great attraction of evil spirits remains that they put a face to the irrational and can explain away the abstract reality of evil in the world. The Egyptian civilization that thrived along the Nile and its delta from the 4th millennium BC until the time of classical Greece and Rome was a model for all that followed. Religion was not organized in any institutional form, with churches and priests and rule books, but was nonetheless an integral part of Egyptian life. Egyptians searched in their religion for something beyond the cycles of everyday existence, for a timeless, unchanging cosmos. The afterlife was a great obsession, as the mummies and grave goods in the death chambers of the pyramids make abundantly clear. Each Egyptian sought to prepare his or her case to put to the gods when he arrived on the threshold of the underworld. Tuat, the underworld, bears a passing resemblance to the hell that was later to become the Christian devil's lair. While its location is not so much under the earth as all around it, Tuat's undisputed master of ceremonies is the black, jackal-headed god Anpu, or Anubis. Represented in tomb paintings like the rest of the Egyptian deity as half man, half beast, Anubis has a tail and horns, and is sometimes shown with the scales that weigh the souls of the dead. The Egyptians believed in many gods, but saw them all as manifestations of the one God. There was no other figure to rival the one God. However, within this pantheon, individual gods could be helpers and hurters. When the crops flourished and life was sweet, the Egyptians would worship the sun god, Ra, or Amun-Re. But when there was drought and famine, plague or infestation, they would pray to Seth. If any one god was popularly associated with evil, it was Seth, who was usually depicted with Horus, the hawk-headed sky god, as part of a two-faced creature. Seth appears in a variety of guises, sometimes a serpent or a black pig, but most often he is a tall, upright figure with boxed-off ears and a proboscis-like snout. In many Egyptian myths, Seth and Horus are locked in mortal combat. The two spend their adulthood with daggers drawn. The ongoing battle represents disharmony, lack of ma'at. Both sustain injury through their lack of harmony, just as the earth and its inhabitants suffer when they fail to strive for ma'at. If a devil exists, it is in an impersonal sense, as the absence of ma'at. The civilization of Mesopotamia is as old, if not older, than that of Egypt. Both were based on river valleys. In the case of Mesopotamia, the crescent of land between the Euphrates and the Tigris in modern-day Iraq. Like the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians had an overriding concern with the cycle of the seasons on whose whims survival depended, and developed a deity to explain the inexplicable in these events. The Mesopotamians were the pioneers of the written word, their script predating the Egyptian hieroglyph. Appropriately, the Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest story in the world, and its subject the original literary hero. The bare bones of the tale are known to have been written down around 2100 BC, well before the first books of the Bible. Gilgamesh marks the debut of the first truly diabolical literary character, Huwawa. The core epic, based on a real-life benevolent king of Uruk who reigned around 2500 BC, concerns a god-man who attempts to overcome death. Gilgamesh goes with his companion Enkidu to the cedar forest, which is guarded by Huwawa. This monster cuts a terrifying, devilish figure. His roaring is the floodstorm, his mouth is fire, his breath is death. As the story was passed on from generation to generation, the struggle between the two took on a broader cosmic significance, and the character of Huwawa became more and more demonic, mirroring the later transformation of the menacing but manageable Satan of the Old Testament into the all-pervading evil one of later literature. Demonology, and indeed the whole notion of a cosmic battle between good and evil, was well developed in Mesopotamia. The people, much more pessimistic and superstitious than the Egyptians, believed they lived on the battleground between the gods and the demons. The demons tended to be secondary to the gods, able to cause trouble, pain, and suffering, but ultimately unable to take on and defeat them. But this did not stop them from trying. Like other peoples of the Near East, the Canaanites, or Phoenicians as the Greeks called them, fashioned gods and demons to help them to understand the challenges and blessings thrown up by their environment. Many of the Canaanites were fishermen and traders at the mercy of the sea. The Canaanites had a highly developed religious tradition whose influences can be seen in the Old Testament and most clearly in the book of Job, where Satan makes his fascinating debut. The archaeological discovery in 1928-1929 of the ancient city of Ugarit on the Syrian coast revealed details of the religious beliefs of the Canaanites and evidence of the extent of their contact with the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. Among the finds that have been dated around 1400 BC are a series of epic poems chronicling the primary Canaanite fertility myths. The key characters are the storm god Baal and his sister, or perhaps wife, Anath. Baal was the son of the high god of the Canaanites, El, ruler of sky and sun, often depicted as a bull. Baal and Anath were both symbols of fertility, a central preoccupation in Canaan as in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Their great enemy was Mot, lord of death and sterility. Just as Huwawa initially triumphs over Gilgamesh, Mot defeats Baal and swallows him, ushering in an era when the crops die in the fields. After 7 years, Anath has her revenge on Mot, killing him and grinding his body into seed to make the fields blossom once more. Anath's victory liberates Baal, who comes back from the dead and inspires a new age of plenty. Thereafter, he and Mot continue their fight, locked in eternal battle. In the Canaanite myth, as in those of Egypt and Mesopotamia, while opposites are important, the idea of dualism is missing. The Greek pantheon is enormously complex and amorphous, a mixture of outside influences from other Near Eastern civilizations, with the myths and legends that belong to the various groups who lived around the Aegean Sea. Brought together by their common language, the Dorians, Ionians, Aeolians, and other Hellenic peoples whom history groups together as the Greeks, held sometimes self-contradictory views on cosmic powers and their own fate after death. At a popular level, there existed superstitions and rituals redolent of those described already in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But what distinguished Greece was that its writers and thinkers attempted, with the birth of schools of philosophy in the 4th century BC, to rationalize human existence and death. Rather than throw themselves on the mercy of ill-defined gods and demons, these philosophers subjected ancient beliefs to logic and reason. The Greeks invented the philosophical question and were no longer content to believe that the gods moved in mysterious ways, one minute sending floods and earthquakes, the next rains and fertile soil. They began the search for a coherent explanation to the world that did not rest upon arbitrary whims and ritualistic sacrifices, but that placed the emphasis on human acts and a divinely ordained plan of right and wrong. One characteristic in particular distinguished the gods of Greece from the monsters of Mesopotamia and the tyrants of Egypt. They were made in the human mold and subject to human passions. In Homer's Odyssey, during the Trojan War, the gods take sides in a manner that is all too human. Homer attributed to the gods everything that was unpleasant in humankind: theft, adultery, deceit. However, Homer's attempt to give a recognizable form to religious beliefs cannot be taken as a blueprint for the faith of society at large. He made little distinction between gods and demons. All had ambiguous characters, a heavenly side as well as traits that belonged in the underworld. Ultimately, all the gods were manifestations of the one God. The Greeks had no one who even aspired to the role later taken by the Christian devil. In fashioning their image of Satan, however, subsequent generations of Christian thinkers, writers, and artists owe a great debt to the Greeks. Some of Lucifer's best-known characteristics are to be glimpsed in the players in the Greek celestial drama. Hermes, for example, was both the messenger of the heavenly court and the god of thieves who led the dead into the underworld. His traditional depiction with winged sandals is believed to have influenced medieval artists. Hermes' son, Pan, was the god of sexual desire, a force seen by the Greeks as both creative and destructive. When the Christians, strongly influenced by Augustine in the 5th century, started to condemn anything to do with sex as bad and devilish, they turned to Pan for iconographic inspiration. His horned, hairy, goat-like figure was the model for many a painting of the lusty, bestial devil. The Greeks were constantly changing, reassessing, and developing their religious beliefs. In the 8th century BC, Homer saw the underworld as a grove of willow and poplar trees, where no distinction was made between the righteous and the wicked. Later writers began to look for some form of divine judgment in death as a way of justifying the fluctuations of fate in this world. Slowly, the underworld came to be more and more associated with the character of Hades, and took on the features of the pit of suffering and gnashing of teeth, fires forever ablaze, with which later generations of Christians became all too familiar. However, the body, weak and subject to ungodly passions and impulses, could deflect man away from the good and toward evil. Plato defined evil in a variety of ways. One argument, he stated, was that evil had no real being at all, but was rather a lack of perfection. He was troubled, however, by the weakness of his theory when confronted with wars, murders, and human violence. How could something so tangible and unjust simply be written off as an absence of good? Plato tried to square the circle by acknowledging such acts as evil, but by absolving the one God of any responsibility. As he wrote in his Republic, "For the good we must assume no other cause than God. But for the cause of evil we must look for in other things, and not in God." When developed by Plato's followers, it was an idea that was to inspire biblical accounts of the fall of angels from heaven and the birth of the Christian devil before the world began. In Persia, it was the prophet Zoroaster, literally golden splendor, who broke the tradition of numerous nature gods and demons in Mesopotamia, and who produced the first character akin in his powers and aims to the Christian devil. Details of the life of Zoroaster are few, but he is believed to have lived between the later half of the 7th century BC and the middle of the 6th century in Bactria, the area known today as Iran. He abandoned the ancient Mesopotamian tradition of two-faced gods, sometimes good and sometimes bad, exerting their power over their followers through forces of nature, and taught his disciples instead that there were two opposite and equivalent forces, the one positive and the other negative. By relegating existing gods to minor roles, Zoroaster elevated Ahura Mazda, the god of light, above all others. Set against Ahura Mazda, who sought to bring law and order to nature, was the fiendish Ahriman, the force for war in nature. All good was due to Ahura Mazda, all evil to Ahriman. Zoroaster was the first recorded dualist, believing that the world could be divided down the middle into black and white, with no one omnipotent power in control. The Gauthas, or hymns, that were reputedly written by Zoroaster make abundantly clear the general principle of opposites. The hymns say, "Now at the beginning the twin spirits have declared their nature, the better and the evil. Of these two spirits, the evil one chose to do the worst things, but the most Holy Spirit, clothed in the most steadfast heavens, joined himself unto righteousness." Some of Zoroaster's disciples later talked of this Holy Spirit as one of two conflicting spirits within the Ahriman, or evil one. In this system, Ahura Mazda was an overall power who begat twin spirits of good and evil, and then left them to battle for the soul of mankind. He was then the court of ultimate appeal, giving them freedom of action, but preventing a final victory for evil. This notion of the supreme God retaining a final veto over the power of the devil is present in Christian teaching. It is difficult not to spot in the figure of Ahriman a prototype of the Christian devil. Described as the evil one, a cosmic force to rival that of the good God, he was likened by Zoroaster to a serpent. As the devil is held responsible for the 7 deadly sins in Christianity, Ahriman was served by 7 arch-fiends: wrong-mindedness, heresy, anarchy, discord, presumption, hunger, and thirst. He inhabited a hell-like void, and Zoroastrianism taught that on death, the soul passes over an accountant's bridge, where those who had sinned could be pulled down into the void for eternal punishment by Ahriman.
As we are saying, enough things are going over the holiday, yeah, we just want the people them keep safe, and nobody has spread your money where you can't get back no money next year, you know. After the holiday, reality will lick you understand? You're going to have to come back to that reality. Okay, hope you're listening to where I'm going, you know. Very important documentary here on the devil. So, we'll go back to college. This is recess time, you know, but recess done, so we'll go back now.
Abundantly clear the general principle of opposites. The hymns say, "Now at the beginning the twin spirits have declared their nature, the better and the evil. Of these two spirits, the evil one chose to do the worst things, but the most Holy Spirit, clothed in the most steadfast heavens, joined himself unto righteousness." Some of Zoroaster's disciples later talked of this Holy Spirit as one of two conflicting spirits within the Ahriman, or evil one. In this system, Ahura Mazda was an overall power who begat twin spirits of good and evil, and then left them to battle for the soul of mankind. He was then the court of ultimate appeal, giving them freedom of action, but preventing a final victory for evil. This notion of the supreme God retaining a final veto over the power of the devil is present in Christian teaching. It is difficult not to spot in the figure of Ahriman a prototype of the Christian devil. Described as the evil one, a cosmic force to rival that of the good God, he was likened by Zoroaster to a serpent. As the devil is held responsible for the 7 deadly sins in Christianity, Ahriman was served by 7 arch-fiends: wrong-mindedness, heresy, anarchy, discord, presumption, hunger, and thirst. He inhabited a hell-like void, and Zoroastrianism taught that on death, the soul passes over an accountant's bridge, where those who had sinned could be pulled down into the void for eternal punishment by Ahriman. There are other parallels between Zoroaster's teachings and those of Christianity. Both warn that a great world crisis is at hand and anticipate a day of judgment. Zoroastrianism talks of a savior created by Zoroaster's seed who will come to redeem the world. The interchange of ideas between Zoroastrianism and Judaism, and hence Christianity, has been well established historically, geographically, and culturally. Although a minority cult, Zoroastrianism influenced a diverse range of groups, most notably the various Gnostic groups who undermined mainstream Christianity with their dualistic views of the world. There is scarcely a mention of the devil in the Old Testament. The figure who plays such a leading role in the New Testament is conspicuous only by his earlier absence. However, scattered throughout the Old Testament is a cast of characters who, individually and together, contain the seeds of the future Prince of Darkness, though they never truly aspire to his role as the apotheosis of evil. The Jewishness of Christianity makes the Hebrew Scriptures, as the Old Testament is often known, the nursery for the devil. Without Judaism, many of the notions Christians today take for granted would never have evolved, while in purely practical terms, without the seedbed and protective cover of Judaism, the tiny band of followers of a short-lived Messiah from Nazareth could not have managed to found one of the world's great religions. The books of the Old Testament were composed between roughly 900 and 100 BC, though the texts, as we know them today, mostly date from the period after the exile of Jews to Babylon from 586 to 538. Carted away from the Promised Land with their spiritual home, the temple destroyed by their conquerors, the Israelites fell back for sustenance and moral courage on weekly readings of the Scriptures. By the end of the exile, or soon afterward, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, had taken on the form we know today, though they detailed events from over 500 years earlier. Though Mesopotamia boasts some of the earliest written texts, the Jews were truly the first people of a book, with the Christians and Muslims following in their wake. When looking at the development of the concept of the devil in the Old and the New Testament, there is no point looking for one right answer. The Bible is a collection of writings by people who use history not simply to report events, but to put over a particular slant. Without some knowledge of the background and of the politics of the time, a straight reading of the Bible is akin to a Martian reading a biography of George Bush by Bill Clinton without knowing any of the context and believing it to be gospel. The exile was a crucial experience in the molding of Jewish identity. It challenged the Israelites to rethink what they had previously taken for granted, their status as God's chosen people. How could Yahweh have allowed them to be enslaved and humiliated? Had he abandoned them? Or had some other force intervened to direct them away from the path of righteousness? Human sinfulness did not seem an adequate explanation for so great a suffering. The arbitrary nature of Yahweh's anger was disorientating and demoralizing, and led not only to a return to the scriptures, but to a parallel surge of interest in superstition, folklore, and myth. This extant oral tradition offered one way forward in the darkness of abandonment and confusion. The prevailing impression left by the Old Testament is that Yahweh, like the one God of the Egyptians, was responsible for everything on earth, holding it in balance through the law that he had handed down to Moses. On the surface, Yahweh leaves no room for anything approximating a personification of evil. The most basic contrast between the Old and New Testaments is that in the first, God is often cruel and willful, while in the second, his all-loving and all-forgiving nature is much more to the fore. At the root of this dichotomy is the fact that for much of the Old Testament, Yahweh represents both good and evil, while in the New, much of his malign function has been hived off to the devil. Much of the early part of the Old Testament in particular is concerned with strict adherence to the law and observance of ritual. Obedience was an obligation that went with the covenant, a response to the love shown by Yahweh. And on a practical level, keeping the law had the advantage of keeping Yahweh good and benign. It was only when the Israelites ignored the law as handed down to Moses that Yahweh showed his darker, more ruthless side. The early books of the Hebrew Scriptures make passing references to evil spirits and demons, hinting that vestiges of polytheism and earlier superstitions may have lingered on before they were expunged by the later Judaic belief in an omnipotent Yahweh. The Satan of the book of Job is the first bearer of that name to merit a capital letter. His role, sitting in the heavenly court, is to play what we might today call devil's advocate, though his powers are a shadow of those enjoyed by the devil of the New Testament. Satan is absolutely loyal to Yahweh, but has taken upon himself the role of chief antagonist to humankind. This is the first time in the Old Testament that the fundamental issue of suffering and why a good God allows it is addressed. As a literary approach to a question that has puzzled God-fearing humanity down the ages, Job is without rival. In it are encapsulated all the dilemmas that have afflicted humankind down the ages, all the questions that theologians and philosophers have debated. Why is there pain and suffering? Why do the wicked prosper and the good lose out? The book is in fact a drama in 3 parts, with the torment and doubts of Job sandwiched between an explanatory prologue and valedictory epilogue, both of which scholars believe were added to the main body of the text after the exile. By the introduction of Satan in the prologue, the dilemma of the eponymous central character is transformed into a discussion in the heavenly court between Yahweh and Satan. By giving Satan such a role, the sufferings of Job were given an extra dimension as an allegory for those of Israel during the exile, and heaped not at Yahweh's door, but at that of his mischievous servant. A series of terrible misfortunes befalls Job in the prologue. His cattle are stolen, his servants put to the sword, fire destroys his sheep, and a freak storm wrecks his house and crushes his children. But, contrary to Satan's expectations, Job refuses to turn his back on Yahweh. Through all his sufferings, Job never gives way, though in his trials and tribulations he finds it increasingly difficult to understand that the God who loves him can also be the one who is punishing him. Job represents humanity searching for an answer to suffering and evil in the face of their own daily tribulations. Job protests his innocence repeatedly in the face of his friends. Their reliance is on the conventional wisdom of the Old Testament, namely, that Yahweh has 2 faces, and that his harsher actions are the result of humankind's sinfulness. By the end of the book, Job is restored to favor. The epilogue leaves him with double what he had before as a reward from Yahweh for keeping the faith. Satan, after his appearance in the prologue, is silenced, and his thesis gains little credence. After all the debate, the prevailing view that God is all-powerful, that evil is from him and somehow part of his plan, remains, despite Job's efforts to highlight the shortcomings of such an approach. The book of Job is, in that way, a lament of the weakness of the system, without proposing a new way forward. Satan cut his teeth in the outpouring of writing that accompanied the Israelites' soul-searching in the post-exile period. His story, taken up in the New Testament, is that of the fallen angel, cast out of heaven, who sets himself up as a rival to Yahweh. It is a story that has become part and parcel of the devil's curriculum vitae in every subsequent age. Scribes and prophets tried to provide an explanation for the fate that had befallen the Jewish people in Babylon and since. In the years after the return from exile, Jewish thought and social behavior came under the influence of Greece, with the upper classes in particular Hellenized in their attitudes and looking down on the masses. This widening social gulf led to the Great Maccabean Revolt of 168-164 BC, which was only suppressed with great bloodshed. The Israelites remained divided and troubled, and though they achieved independence in 142 BC, they fell under Roman hegemony in 63 BC, heralding an almost 2,000-year wait for the re-emergence of the Jewish state. The Testament of Reuben, a book of the Apocrypha written around 109-106 BC, switches the focus to the more traditional Christian targets of Adam and Eve, with Eve tempting Adam to sin and thus setting an example for the daughters of earth who seduced hapless watcher angels, a phrase used in the book of Daniel and meaning the eyes of God. These rebels are the angels who had accompanied Satan on his fall from grace. In placing the blame for sinfulness and evil more on women than men, Reuben was anticipating much of what was later to be preached in the name of God. It conjured up the image of the watcher angels taking possession of women while they were making love to their husbands, with the result that their offspring were poisoned by evil from their first breath. Lust was one of the main reasons advanced in the apocryphal literature for the fall of angels from heaven, and it became firmly rooted in the imagery of the demons. Another explanation was offered by the Book of Secrets of Enoch. Here the angels rebelled on account of their pride. The Apocalypse of Moses, dated around 70 AD, suggests that the angels were jealous not of Yahweh's powers, but of man's, specifically Adam's. It was as if the older children of God rebelled against their new sibling down on earth and tempted him into offending their father. The rapid development of the idea of the evil one in apocryphal literature poses the question of where the ideas that took such a hold on writers and thinkers of the time came from. Historians of the period have spotted traces of Belial in Canaanite thought, while a fragment known as the Book of Giants, found with the Dead Sea Scrolls and thought to be of this era, mentions Gilgamesh and Huwawa. The most obvious link, however, is with Babylon and the Zoroastrianism that the Jews encountered during their exile and occupation. Cyrus the Persian, the liberator of the Jews from their Babylonian prison, and described in Isaiah as the anointed of Yahweh, was a follower of Zoroaster. The parallels between the dualism of that credo and what appeared in the Apocrypha are striking. The difficulty, as ever, with parallels between the developing demonology of the Near East and that of Zoroastrianism is that the time scale allows for a two-way traffic, and it is never entirely clear who is influencing whom. What is beyond question, however, is that though there seems to be a great sea change between the Old and New Testaments and their attitude to the personification of evil, the books of the Apocrypha provide the bridge. They were widely read at the time of Christ and influenced both his disciples and Christian thinkers who later fashioned the devil as a terrifying adult. The devil's clash with Jesus in the New Testament dominates proceedings. The shadowy, uncertain adolescent of the Hebrew Scriptures, who put on such a spurt of growth in the literature of the Apocrypha, matures in the holiest of the holy books of Christianity. Though it is tantamount to heresy in the mainstream churches today to mention the fact, the New Testament is a story of the war between Jesus and the devil, between good and evil. The tendency among modern theologians and church leaders is to avoid mentioning the devil, lest they or their creed be dismissed as medieval or superstitious. At best, they will concede that his repeated appearances in the New Testament are a metaphor, a symbol of evil, though any talk that such an explanation should then be extended to Jesus is fiercely resisted. The consequence is that too much study of the New Testament today excludes the devil. It is as if Dr. Moriarty were edited out of the Sherlock Holmes stories. The character and actions of the devil are crucial to the story of salvation of humankind that is at the core of the New Testament. Without the devil, Christ has nothing and no one to defeat, no way of dispensing with the shortcomings of the here and now and of ushering in the kingdom of God. Yet the devil does not rise out of the pages of the New Testament as a rounded character, the ever-eager artful dodger, the con-man in working clothes who became central to the Christian tradition. This is perhaps not surprising when one considers that Jesus, too, is seen more on account of his deeds than as himself. These omissions would seem to confirm the theory that the New Testament is more than a straightforward history and biography, that it should be read on more than one level. The New Testament contains not a single description of Christ, what color his hair and eyes were. Though it is his humanity that is crucial, a God-made man, there is little sense of Jesus as a person. His image was later created by generation after generation of artists, down to today's favored rendition of him with blue eyes, hippie hair, and a beard, the erstwhile star of Jesus Christ Superstar. Likewise, the devil can often appear a cipher, a caricature of unpleasantness, conjured up to convey a point. When his personality is explored, it is without a single focus. The questions of origins and background are left vague. The conclusion of the New Testament may be a victory for Christ and the powers of light, but the devil's fate is far from crystal clear. He is stranded in a kind of limbo, marauding and threatening, but at the same time ultimately doomed come the day of judgment. The New Testament writers left it to subsequent generations of Christians, high and low, learned and superstitious, to mold this compelling creature into the apotheosis of evil. Whatever the different ways of approaching the New Testament, the Gospel accounts are presented from the pulpit and in various papal pronouncements as if they are a verbatim transcript of Christ's pronouncements. The truth is rather different. They are the words of God in the words of man, and were written up to 70 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. Like the Old Testament, the New is in no particular chronological order, and reflects the political and social outlook of its authors. Some of St. Paul's letters, for example, predate the writing of the Gospel accounts. In the New Testament, however, they come afterward. And though the Gospels themselves start with Matthew's version, there is a strong, many would say overwhelming case for saying that Mark's was the first Gospel. Paul, in particular, is characteristic of another too easily forgotten aspect of the New Testament, the conviction that the second coming was imminent. This plays some part in its, at times, catch-all and simplistic tendency to put everything ill down to the devil. The authors of much of the New Testament were sure that the Messiah's return in triumph would be any day, and that the people had to be won around. Such messianic hopes proved illusory, and received the first of many setbacks when the Jews fought what was for many of them a holy war against their Roman overlords from 66 to 70 AD. The Messiah did not descend from on high to rescue his people. Instead, Jerusalem was destroyed, with Jew turning against Jew as the bitter factional divisions between Pharisees and Sadducees turned into a witch hunt in the name of purity.
Yeah, this is the Continental RFM there with you. We want to yell up my brethren in San Francisco. We want to yell up Daniel, who we know say a listener. We want to yell up Abba Zero. Abba Zero say get high-tech, so you can hear the Continental now without cover Jamaica. Abba Zero say the tape about the devil is very intense. So, we want to big up the man, you know, because you know, a long time Abba Zero want to find out how to hear the Continental, like which part you there, and get the opportunity to do it now. So, we want to yell up Usher, because we know, say, without a doubt, Usher line up that. You understand? So Usher, we want to big you up to make your father can listen to his favorite program from Berkeley. That don't mean he must come back to Jamaica now, you know, so you can hear the Continental from Berkeley, you know. Alright, sir. This is the Continental RFM. We're presenting to you a biography of the devil. First time on the radio, anyway, which is the second time on the continent still, but you know, so you're not going to hear them theological reasoning here. College reasoning here from no other radio station. Them hours a man in here. You understand? So, without further ado, cutting it.
Without Paul, Christianity might well have remained just another apocalyptic Jewish cult. It was this poacher-turned-gamekeeper who spread Christ's teachings beyond Israel, nurtured the developing church with a missionary zeal, gave intellectual vigor to the credo, and debunked the idea that Jesus came only for the Jews. Paul's various letters to the Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians, and Galatians have been enormously influential in the development of Christianity. They epitomize the sometimes confused picture the New Testament presents of the devil. In his letter to the church in Rome, Paul appears to confirm the traditional idea that God is omnipotent, source of all things good and bad in the world. Paul also writes extensively of the devil and his role in a world that is teetering on the brink of moral and physical disaster. In the words of literary historian Neil Forsyth, every time Paul uses the word Satan, he is referring to the opponent of human salvation, not to the figure who does battle with Michael in the book of Revelation. Unquote. The cosmic dualism that came later in the book of Revelation, which concludes the New Testament with a vision of a war in heaven, has no place in Paul. Neither does talk of evil spirits and demons. Paul casts his net wider and has harsh words to say about human sinfulness. The notion of evil being the result of an external force preying on humankind, which is the dominant theme of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, finds little space in Paul's theology. Rather than blame everything on the devil, he attempts instead to draw up a new version of Yahweh's original covenant with the Jews that could include everyone. It was as if Paul was trying to update the law, the moral code of the Old Testament, in the light of Christ's teachings. The association of the Spirit with God and the flesh as open to the wiles of the devil was not yet made. But Paul's high moral tone on sexuality was to be taken up by those who saw anything to do with the body as the work of Satan. However, in drawing a distinction between flesh and spirit in the same way that Christ is set against Satan, Paul was giving a clear signal. The flesh was one source of sinfulness. In his first letter to the church at Corinth, Paul suggests another, when he compares the destruction that Adam brought through his infidelity in the Garden of Eden. Adam is then the enemy by his original sin, a legacy passed on to all who came after him. There is no mention of the devil, though later he, and not Adam, became the snake-like villain of Eden. The evil one has many names in the New Testament. Usually he is either the Hebrew Satan or the Greek devil. In the three synoptic Gospels, the accounts by Matthew, Mark, and Luke of Christ's life written after Paul, the devil also appears as Beelzebub. The Pharisees, confronted with Jesus' capacity to cure a blind and dumb demoniac, respond, "The man casts out devils only through Beelzebub, the prince of devils." Jesus denies the charge. "If it is through the Spirit of God that I cast devils out, then know that the kingdom of God has overtaken you." Though the origins of the name are unclear, Beelzebub, literally Lord of the Flies, seems to be a derogatory form of Prince Baal, the Canaanite god. In his 3-year public ministry, Jesus' principal weapon in fighting the devil is exorcism. Though today exorcism is a rare and to some an exotic practice, more the preserve of Hollywood than mainstream churches, it was a fairly routine procedure for coping with sickness among the Jews at the time of Christ. Exorcism is one of the key features that distinguishes the synoptic Gospels from the writings of Paul and John. Paul scarcely spares a thought for demons and devils, and then only as a way of poking fun at the beliefs of those he deems heathens. By contrast, in Mark, the author rushes through Jesus' early life and his period in the desert in order to include in the first chapter an exorcism. The tone is set. As the Gospel says, that evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were possessed by devils. The whole town came crowding round the door, and he cured many who were suffering from diseases of one kind or another. He also cast out many devils. Mark recounts that it was through his exorcisms of evil spirits that Jesus' fame spread. In a literal sense, such encounters were cures. But on another, much more significant level, they are one of the distinctive ways in which the New Testament approaches the question of good and evil. What is inside the possessed person comes out when faced down by Christ. Jesus makes it clear that the true source of disharmony in individuals and, by association, in the world, is an external agent, evil spirits who are in the pay of the devil. The Synoptic Gospels leave open the questions of how Satan fits into the divine plan of an all-knowing, all-seeing God, and the devil's indispensability in bringing about Christ's passion and death and resurrection. The possibility that the devil could still in some dark way be God's servant, the tempter of humankind after the fashion of Job, is not entirely exhausted. The writings of the Apostle John and his circle, however, sought to put any suggestion out of court. The last entry in the New Testament, the extraordinary book of Revelation, is also associated with the Apostle John, either the work of the evangelist himself or one of his immediate circle, somewhere between 70 and 95 AD. John is less interested than the synoptics in agents of the devil, in evil spirits and demons, than in Satan himself. Of the four Gospels, John is the most dualist, a precursor to the high point of the battle between God and the devil in Revelation. Only in John's account of the last week of Christ's life are the events of the crucifixion put in the context of the cosmic battle. At the Last Supper, Jesus tells his apostles, "Now sentence is being passed on this world. Now the prince of this world is being overthrown. And when I am lifted up from the earth, I shall draw all men to myself." John is preoccupied with why the Jews failed to recognize Jesus as their Savior. He mixes Old Testament ideas about the sinfulness of human nature with the suggestion in the other Gospels that the devil possesses humans and makes them do evil deeds. The book of Revelation develops John's Gospel and the concept of eternal life. Revelation is final confirmation that the Christian Satan is a direct descendant of the cosmic adversaries of the Near Eastern credos. For the devil's life story, the most significant section of Revelation is chapter 12, which tells, for the first and only time in the Bible, of a battle royal in heaven. It is a vision that has contributed enormously to the picture of the devil presented in learned articles and classrooms around the globe. Satan starts off as a huge red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. The dragon's tail then sweeps 1/3 of the stars in the sky down to earth, before turning its attention to a woman about to give birth to a child. The dragon tries to eat the child, but is foiled. The text then abruptly changes direction and focuses on the war in heaven, with the dragon and his angels slugging it out with the archangel Michael and the virtuous angels. The latter prevail, and the dragon and his band are driven out of heaven. The narrative continues with a description of the dragon Satan becoming a sea monster with the mouth of a lion, the paws of a bear, and the look of a leopard, screeching blasphemies and making war against the saints and all humanity. In one vision are collected many of the characteristics that continue to shape the image of the devil to this day: the serpent, the wild beast, the deceiver, the utterer of blasphemies, even the would-be satanic epigram 666. The devil serpent dragon figure is held responsible in Revelation for natural disasters on the earth, in the same way that earlier races had blamed the dark shadow of their gods for earthquakes and floods. Revelation is the only New Testament book to consider natural evil. The rest of the canon is concerned largely with personal morality and social evil. And what happens to Satan on the much-anticipated Day of Judgment? Revelation tells us, "Then I saw an angel come down from heaven with the key of the abyss in his hand and an enormous chain. He overpowered the dragon, that primeval serpent which is the devil and Satan, and chained him up for 1,000 years. Revelation also states that after the 1,000 years he will be freed again to deceive all the nations in the earth, but he and his armies will be consumed by fire, and finally, then the devil will be thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet are, and their torture will not stop day or night forever and ever." A vision of the last judgment follows, when Hades and death were emptied of the dead that were in them, and everyone was judged according to the way in which he had lived. Then death and Hades, and anybody whose name could not be found in the book of life, were thrown into the burning lake. The promise is that God will be triumphant. That is one of the safeguards that prevents the devil being an equal and equivalent power to God. In the meantime, the devil is left with some latitude to work his spell on humankind. Whatever its other ambiguities concerning the devil's life and work, the New Testament makes it abundantly clear that his driving ambition was to defeat Christ and bring down the church. It is ironical, therefore, that when the first Christians found themselves under attack, first from the Jews, then the Romans, and finally dissidents within their own ranks, they turned to the devil as a way of safeguarding the future of the church. By making Satan the author of all the woes that were afflicting them, and in the process demonizing all who sought to put down the fledgling church, the founding fathers created an opponent with a unique power to unite Christians and strengthen their resolve in fighting the good fight. In the decades that followed Christ's death, the original band of apostles remained the focus of the ever-expanding cult that worshipped his name. They ensured that a single teaching line was maintained and instilled discipline by dint of the authority that came with their first-hand knowledge of the Messiah. However, their deaths deprived the church of such a focus, and soon there were as many different interpretations of his teaching as there were new Christian communities springing up. The optimism and sense of expectation created by promises of an imminent second coming turned to disappointment and disagreement when it failed to materialize. As outside threats multiplied, the devil was a handy scapegoat, and his malevolent status grew accordingly. The early church fathers discovered, however, that blaming your fate on Satan had a downside. Soon different groups, known by a variety of names but collectively called the Gnostics, were ascribing every challenge they met to the devil and denying that the earth was God's creation. Many suggested that a place so hostile and unwelcoming could only have been made by Satan. Their solution was to turn in on themselves and actively seek martyrdom as a way of escaping a living hell for the safety of life after death in heaven with God. The more clear-sighted fathers quickly recognized that this was a recipe for disaster, carrying with it the threat of self-destruction. To avoid such a fate, they had to draw up boundaries for the devil. He could not be an equal and opposite force to God, the master of this world against the master of the next. The framework that they developed as a response, a halfway house between a theological monism and a practical dualism, has remained the bedrock of Christian belief ever since. Ironically, for a church that in subsequent eras perfected the art of demonizing its opponents, Christianity began the 2nd century more sinned against than sinner. The early Christians found themselves charged by the Romans with precisely the sort of foul ritual, incest, orgies, cannibalism, that was subsequently attached by Christians to the name of Satan and those alleged to have sold their souls to him.
Yeah, this is the cutting edge, and I reformers will say, they show them why Clyde we, man. I tell you, man, they show them why Clyde we. Someone show. Everybody has show something. Yeah, so with the theological college of the cutting edge, you know, say, them kind of lectures where people pay enough money for go sit down and listen to, but, you know, if you just have the time and the energy, you can sit right in your bedroom, in your living room and turn on and hear, get some knowledge and open your mind. Because sometimes I say, most of our Christian friends them and Christian brethren them, anytime them turn Christian, it look like them lose them sense of intelligence. It's like, nobody not tell us that you believe in a God, you must think, Rasta. It's like, it's a human thing to think. Intelligence is so it's part of the gift of a human being that him get, or that she get. So there's no need to give up your intelligence when you start to believe in a deity, in a God. There's no need to give it up. And I find a whole heap of ones give up that reasoning ability when them start to become Christians. And it's very unfortunate because there's so much other things out there to understand and to know outside of your little conclave, your little box, that if you lose that aspect of your human ability, it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem. So the cutting edge occasionally present these things. And as we said, this month, we choose to really focus on the Christian listeners, you know. We present something that I don't know much about the Bible, and it focus on the New Testament. Today, we're giving you a different aspect. If people can have a biography of the devil. You know, I've always said that instead of keeping the devil alive, why them don't have a world court? A world court, and just try the devil for all the atrocities that him do for 2,000 years, and just put him to rest instead of keeping him alive. And I find that religious people, especially in this Christian religion, they are the ones that is responsible for keeping the devil alive. You know, they are really projecting a lot of things on this negative force, this negative energy. that them call the devil. And they are almost trying to humanize him now. Make this idea become human. Even though it is emanating from human beings, but we don't see why we should have human beings becoming devil. As a matter of fact, the Protestant church is what gives rise to the humanness of the devil by way of the papacy. That now we'll find that like Seventh-day Adventists will tell you that the devil have a face and it's sitting right there in Rome. This is the Cutting Edge on RFM, continuing the Theological College of the Cutting Edge at this hours of the morning. You have to have the strength and the vigor to come to this college.
Or to unite Christians and strengthen their resolve in fighting the good fight. In the decades that followed Christ's death, the original band of apostles remained the focus of the ever-expanding cult that worshipped his name. They ensured that a single teaching line was maintained and instilled discipline by dint of the authority that came with their first-hand knowledge of the Messiah. However, their deaths deprived the church of such a focus, and soon there were as many different interpretations of his teaching as there were new Christian communities springing up. The optimism and sense of expectation created by promises of an imminent second coming turned to disappointment and disagreement when it failed to materialize. As outside threats multiplied, the devil was a handy scapegoat, and his malevolent status grew accordingly. The early church fathers discovered, however, that blaming your fate on Satan had a downside. Soon different groups, known by a variety of names but collectively called the Gnostics, were ascribing every challenge they met to the devil and denying that the earth was God's creation. Many suggested that a place so hostile and unwelcoming could only have been made by Satan. Their solution was to turn in on themselves and actively seek martyrdom as a way of escaping a living hell for the safety of life after death in heaven with God. The more clear-sighted fathers quickly recognized that this was a recipe for disaster, carrying with it the threat of self-destruction. To avoid such a fate, they had to draw up boundaries for the devil. He could not be an equal and opposite force to God, the master of this world against the master of the next. The framework that they developed as a response, a halfway house between a theological monism and a practical dualism, has remained the bedrock of Christian belief ever since. Ironically, for a church that in subsequent eras perfected the art of demonizing its opponents, Christianity began the 2nd century more sinned against than sinner. The early Christians found themselves charged by the Romans with precisely the sort of foul ritual, incest, orgies, cannibalism, that was subsequently attached by Christians to the name of Satan and those alleged to have sold their souls to him. In Rome, religion was a national cult, cement to bind the far-flung empire together. Christians had the effrontery to demur, and their refusal to take part in official worship was seen as a threat to the very fabric of the empire. The Christians' claim that Christ, and not the godlike emperor, was Lord of the universe, was seen as subversive. Eagerly awaiting the second coming, they had a habit of decrying everything about the here and now. As the Romans turned an increasingly critical eye on the Christian communities, they saw a group speaking out defiantly against their political overlords. Minucius Felix wrote in his Octavius of the charges leveled against his fellow believers by the Romans. As for the initiation of new members, the details are as disgusting as they are well known. A child, covered in dough to deceive the unwary, is set before a would-be novice. The novice stabs the child to death with invisible blows. Indeed, he himself, deceived by the coating of dough, thinks his stabs harmless. Then, it's horrible, they hungrily drink the child's blood and compete with one another as they divide the limbs. These accusations were treated by the early Christians with a mixture of scorn, humor, and outrage. But the fact they were made at all reveals a side of the human psyche that is all too ready to demonize a group within its midst, to believe the most heinous of accusations that have little basis in fact. In short, the Christians learned from their misfortunes to redirect the fire of their one-time opponents onto their own adversaries. First targets of this new form of demonization were the Romans. Where the Jews had long regarded their Roman overlords as evil, the Christians took this one stage further by describing the empire as the work of the devil. Despite the ringing tones of the book of Revelation, at the dawn of the 2nd century of Christianity, the devil remained decidedly enigmatic. The Book of Enoch was well known, and its story of the fallen watcher angels, with Satan as their leader, enjoyed widespread credence in the Christian communities. However, beyond that general consensus loomed larger unresolved issues. If Satan was a fallen angel, he must have been created by God in the first place. Why then did he go astray? Pride, lust, envy had all been suggested by various apocryphal writers. How far could God then be held responsible for the devil's deeds? Was the evil one a full-blown adversary, a loose cannon, or simply an agent of an omnipotent God? Behind all these questions lay the fundamental clash of dualism against monism, or rather, of what degree of dualism the emerging Christian church could tolerate. Some Christian writers favored a theological dualism to match the day-to-day beliefs of the faithful. They therefore presented an ever more polarized view of the cosmos, at odds with Old and New Testament monism, with God and the devil slogging it out with their respective armies. It was left to the leaders of the early church to find an uneasy compromise to answer this new, and to their mind, dangerous trend. God is wholly good, they decreed, and knows more than we do. The devil lies at the root of many of the mysteries, suffering, natural disasters, destructive human behavior, rejection of God, and continues to wage a rearguard action in a battle with God that ultimately is lost. Christians wanted to put a face on the adversary that was attacking them and created a devil who captured the popular imagination. And the link between heresy and the name of Satan was quickly established in early Christianity. It became a distinguishing feature of Christianity that kept Satan forever in the forefront of believers' minds. The devil and heresy were ever more closely associated as Christianity faced in the 3rd century the greatest threat yet to its survival: the rise of Gnosticism, which gave the devil a role equal to that of God. The very ambiguity of Christianity on the subject of the devil has meant that down the ages groups of believers have seen Satan as an equivalent and opposite power to God. The first such heretics were the Gnostics. The term Gnosticism, based on the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge, is used in many contexts. The high point of Gnosticism in the 2nd and early 3rd centuries proved to be a cathartic moment for Christianity, forcing it to establish a canon and define what was and what was not an acceptable doctrine. Gnosticism was an amalgam of ideas borrowed from the Greek philosophers, from Judaism, and from Zoroastrianism. Its fundamental principle, salvation, was based on a secret knowledge revealed to the elect by God. These chosen few became the source of Gnostic thought and account for its shapelessness. Their revelations of the divine were diverse in the extreme. All Gnostics rejected the here and now as irredeemably evil. They borrowed from Plato and his followers the notion that the soul has to turn inward, away from the world of senses and matter toward a higher spiritual plane. From Zoroastrianism, the Gnostics inherited a separate but complementary idea of two opposite but equal cosmic spirits in conflict, one benign and the other malevolent. Run together, these two legacies led the Gnostics to believe that the visible world of flesh, earth, and water was in the grip of an evil creator. Only the spirit, coming from the invisible world of light, was good. Gnosticism became a deeply pessimistic credo, a counsel of despair totally at odds with its environment, fragmented by the excesses and idiosyncrasies of its chosen few, disorganized and overburdened with theories and mystical notions. The most influential Gnostic thinker and writer was Marcion of Pontus. Marcion, deeply influenced by Gnostic pessimism, became obsessed with the question of evil in the world and detected the influence of a devil-like figure called the Demiurge in the Old Testament. Meaning literally world maker or partial mover, this was a favorite creation of the Greek-speaking Gnostics. The Demiurge was the creator of this world and stood in the shadow of God, the prime mover who was the creator of the world to come. Because of their passionate attachment to the Demiurge, the Gnostics risked, in the Church Fathers' view, compromising God and his creation and turning Christianity into a vague, mystical, and inward-looking sect. They had to be driven out, and the chosen method was to brand them heretics and servants of Satan. Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon, who lived from 140 till 202, was an ardent refuter of the Gnostic proposition that the world was made evil. He preferred to invoke human responsibility for sin. Without that, there would be a free-for-all, without any sort of morality put off until death. Irenaeus was the first outspoken advocate of original sin, a concept hinted at in St. Paul, given its most persuasive treatment by Augustine, and a dogma that remains a central part of Christianity to this day. Adam and Eve represented the goodness of God's creation, but Satan entered the garden and tempted them. Since God, Irenaeus said, had given humanity the freedom to choose between good and evil, Satan was able to exploit its Achilles heel. All humans carry the baggage of Adam and Eve's original sin. However, according to Irenaeus, Christ came as the second Adam to make good by his death and resurrection that first failure. Irenaeus put forward a whole new theory of atonement. Christ's death atoned for past sinfulness. God was offering his Son as ransom to liberate those who had died and those who were to come from the grip of the devil, into which they had been delivered by Adam. The devil, however, tried to overstep his authority and killed Jesus, who, being unaffected by Adam's sin, was able to descend to hell and inflict a mortal wound on Satan. Tertullian followed Irenaeus in pulling the early church back from the brink of Gnosticism. According to Tertullian, God had made the world good, and human sin and Satan's sin had distorted it. The devil was less a creator than a creature of God who had rebelled and fallen from grace. Tertullian took up the notion that humanity had been given a choice between good and evil. What God creates, the devil is seeking to destroy or pervert. Warming to his theme, Tertullian identified various demonic activities: astrology, necromancy, magic, horse races, baths, taverns, theaters, brothels, makeup, fancy clothes. For Tertullian, it was a lie for a woman to dress herself up as anything other than she was. And since the devil was the prince of lies, any attempt to improve on nature was to play into the hands of Satan. While much of Tertullian's theology would have gone over the heads of the early Christians, he contributed greatly to the composite picture of Satan that was to be passed down from generation to generation. One of the most important tools in fashioning a single Christianity was the change from an oral tradition to a written one. The New Testament canon emerged around this period in the written form we know today, partly as an exercise in bringing together the divergent communities within the wider Christian family. Parallel to this development was the growth in the power and prestige of the bishops, which contributed to the process of giving Christianity an intellectual underpinning. Thus far it had been based on popular rituals, shared celebrations, a great outpouring of love, and an immovable conviction that the second coming was imminent. Those who had begun to dabble with what might be called theology had embroidered onto this base a patchwork of different ideas. Origen, who lived from 185 until 254, followed Irenaeus and Tertullian in arguing against the Gnostics that the world was good. But in order to be truly good, you have to have a choice, and hence God had also created freedom that included the freedom to do evil. Evil was then part of creation. When he turned his attention to the problem of evil in this world which was created good, Origen came up with a theory that owed much to Greece and Plato. The purpose of the world, he suggested, was to learn to love God. Not to do this was to lack purpose, to lack being. Evil in this plan is non-being, nothingness, an absence or a void. Logically, the devil as the apotheosis of evil is also non-being. Rather than slavishly follow the order of Adam and Eve's fall from grace in Eden and then the descent of the watcher angels, Origen suggested that the angels had rebelled first and that God had created Adam and Eve as compensation after such a great disappointment. But Adam and Eve then fell prey to the fallen angels and joined them in their rebellion. The devil's fall, Origen concluded, was not to do with lust for the daughters of earth, but on account of pride. He wanted to be God. It was a radical suggestion that placed human suffering and evil in the broader context of a cosmic battle between God and the devil. After Adam and Eve went the way of all flesh, demons and good angels or intelligences were left to fight it out. That struggle was going on in each and every human, Origen said, two rival forces pulling us between being and non-being. Adam and Eve, by their sin, had tipped the balance in the favor of evil, he went on, and it required Christ's suffering and death to restore the equilibrium and give good angels the upper hand. Augustine was born in 354 into a new kind of Christian church, one that had become a major force in the Roman Empire. In 313, the Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan prescribed toleration for the new religion. In 392, Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of the empire. Augustine was born into a middle-class home in what is today Algeria. He did not formally join the church until he was a young man in Milan. Previously, he had lived what he later came to see as an appallingly dissolute life. Aside from his sexual license, Augustine was a Manichaean for 9 years. This cult, which existed on the fringes of Christianity, revolved around the personality and thoughts of Mani, a late 3rd century Mesopotamian ecstatic. From Zoroastrianism, Mani copied dualist ideas, and pessimism from Gnosticism. A controversial figure, Mani was executed at the behest of the Zoroastrians. Augustine's early writings on joining the Christian church were taken up with rebutting Mani's claims with Jewish and Greek notions of a beautiful created universe. In particular, he demonized the man. Augustine was born into a middle-class home in what is today Algeria. He did not formally join the church until he was a young man in Milan. Previously, he had lived what he later came to see as an appallingly dissolute life. Aside from his sexual license, Augustine was a Manichaean for 9 years. This cult, which existed on the fringes of Christianity, revolved around the personality and thoughts of Mani, a late 3rd century Mesopotamian ecstatic. From Zoroastrianism, Mani copied dualist ideas, and pessimism from Gnosticism. A controversial figure, Mani was executed at the behest of the Zoroastrians. Augustine's early writings on joining the Christian church were taken up with rebutting Mani's claims with Jewish and Greek notions of a beautiful created universe. In particular, he demonized the Manichaean leader in Carthage, Bishop Faustus. Augustine accused him, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, of trapping the wayward in the snares of Satan through, as he put it, flesh's morbid impulse and lethal sweetness. The equation of sex with sin and the devil was a powerful and recurring theme in Augustine's writings, and Christianity's residual sexual pessimism owes a great deal to his particular outlook. Augustine's great theme was the sinfulness of humanity, and hence he was more interested in individuals' responsibility for the evil that he perceived in the world than the devil's. However, he wrote in one of his earliest works, on the free choice of the will, that he had always believed in the vast power of the devil. Satan, Augustine held, was under God's control, but each individual had demons battling to seize possession of his or her soul. The human race he described as a fruit tree, made as good by God, but providing something for the devil to pluck at and play with. In Confessions, Augustine lumps together human sinfulness with the devil's as if they are different sides of the same coin, rather than one being caused by the other. He wrote, "The deceiving mediator has one thing in common with human beings, namely sin. He wishes to appear to have another feature in common with God. Since he is not clothed with mortal flesh, he boasts that he is immortal. But because the wages of sin is death, he, in common with mankind, is condemned to death." Augustine believed that Satan was the chief of the fallen angels who became demons. They too had been given free will, but had sinned because of a defect in their wills that God did not know about, but which he permitted. The devil could not be saved on the final day, Augustine wrote, but rather had lost both his intelligence and his capacity to love when he chose evil. This theory, however, did not quite match up with predestination. In his later works, Augustine returned to the topic and suggested that pride had been the reason, if not the cause, of Satan's fall. The devil wanted to be God. When he failed in that, the devil took his revenge by polluting Adam and hence, through original sin, the rest of humankind. In his tract on the Trinity, Augustine wrote of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection as God offering his son to the devil as the food in the mousetrap. Satan made a grab for Jesus, but overestimated his own powers, for Christ was not only a man, but God incarnate. The devil was thus defeated, but will stay with humanity until the second coming. The essential events and personality traits of the adult devil are in place. His dispute with God, his creator, his rebellion, his perversion of the Garden of Eden, the breaking of his hold over humanity after Christ's passion, his subservience to God, but continuing role as a source of evil within a world created good. Most of his best-known features are there too. the sulfur, the brimstone, the torment, the association with the serpent. The devil had come of age and had taken on the mantle of leader of the opposition. As the church began to grow in power and influence, as its political ambitions multiplied and hopes of the second coming faded, Satan loomed large in its thoughts, both as an adversary to be feared and, increasingly, as a potential rallying point for bringing and holding the faithful in line when outside forces or internal dissidents threatened to sweep the Church of Peter onto the rocks. As the early church expanded throughout Europe from the 5th century onward, its missionaries discovered Satan to be a useful ally in making new converts. Preaching that God was both loving and the ultimate source of every misfortune in the world was a handicap when addressing people with an existing deity of benevolent and malign spirits. So the missionaries began to talk up the devil's role. From the pulpits and in the mosaic sculptures and illustrations that were the principal teaching tools in an age of illiteracy, Satan's reputation as the enemy grew and grew. When looking at the role the adult devil played in society from the era of the early church until the dawn of the 20th century, it is vital to picture a very different world. Fear, insecurity, and pessimism were determining factors in shaping people's lives and expectations. There were doctors with rudimentary skills in the latter part of the period under review, and village healers with supernatural and sinister powers. Yet what are today regarded as trivial diseases were then a death warrant. Colds and flu could not be dealt with by antibiotics. The more unusual afflictions were unequivocally put down to the work of evil spirits. The society of the first millennium, and at least half of the second, was largely agricultural and rural. It was only at the end of this period that urbanization, literacy, and wider availability of books made an impact. With no banks and no concept of financial insurance, people kept their wealth, their guarantee of food on the table, in flimsy barns that could easily be destroyed by fire or torrent. People teetered on the brink of disaster in a way that is now hard to imagine, and that might easily induce a state of despair. To ward off such feelings, they indulged in a shared belief in supernatural powers, be they pre-Christian, pagan, Jewish, Gnostic, or Christian. Such supernatural powers were thought to be at play in even the most trivial events: an animal's sickness or health, a hen's fertility, a dog barking in the night. Christianity undertook significant missionary sallies into northern Europe during the papacy of Gregory the Great, 540 to 604. With his active encouragement, the word spread northward and westward beyond the Alps to modern-day France, Germany, Scandinavia, and, under Augustine of Canterbury, who landed in Kent in 596, to England. There had been, of course, Christianity in these areas during the time of the Roman Empire. With the collapse of the empire, however, the Christian foothold came under threat from the victor's own Norse and Teutonic deities. Gregory's missionaries set out to buttress these threatened outposts of what he had come to see as his own kingdom. He pushed ahead with turning the church's role into that of a political power, with the papacy uniting church and state under a kind of divine monarchy. Christ and the saints became weapons for the missionaries to defeat the powers of darkness and paganism. This missionary push was partially successful, but many held on to their old ways of magic and superstition at the same time as embracing Christianity. Gregory did not attempt to wipe out all traces of paganism straight away. A pragmatist and a politician, he permitted that in some missionary areas there should not be any immediate attempt to displace existing religious systems and expressions of community solidarity. Instead, he realized that to take root, the new faith had to follow a three-pronged strategy. First, coexistence and toleration. Later, transformation, adapting existing rituals to Christianity's practices and calendar. And finally, persecution. Sometimes, where the missionaries felt themselves on fertile ground, all three would come together in one great push. In other areas, it was a much slower progress. For the greater part of the first millennium and beyond, Christianity lived grudgingly in parallel with older beliefs and superstitions. The interchange of ideas included trying to superimpose Christian ideas on pagan practices. In reality, the old and not quite vanquished left its mark on the new and triumphant. One commonly used stage in transformation came when villagers held week-long festivals in honor of the various pagan deities who they believed would ensure a good harvest. Christian clerics picked up on the idea and introduced the notion of a patron saint for the community. The festival evolved into celebrating the saint. However, in the minds of their congregations, the saint was often just a new name for the spirits they already worshipped. The symbolism of pagan festivals could be adapted to Christian ends. St. John's Day was celebrated on the same day that some rural communities marked the start of preparations for the harvest. The main thrust of these pagan events was the victory of light over darkness, marked by the lighting of bonfires that blazed in the night sky. This age-old rite was effortlessly assimilated by the Church, since it fitted perfectly with its own imagery of Christ, the bringer of light, vanquishing evil. Rather more problematic was what came after the lighting of bonfires: nude swimming, dancing, leaping over fires, lovemaking, and revelry. At first, the Church turned a blind eye to such excess, calculating that the essentials of the Christian message had been conveyed concerning Christ's triumph, and that all else was of secondary importance. In the late Middle Ages, however, when the continued existence of magic and superstition provoked greater hostility among the ecclesiastical authorities, similar unrestrained merrymaking came to be regarded as satanic. These voices within Christianity associated anything that was sacred to the pagan gods with the devil as a means of debunking indigenous beliefs. Christians were taught by their monks and priests that the devil lived in pagan temples and that such places had to be sprinkled with holy water, stripped of their decorations, and rebuilt with an altar. Force, flexibility, and ingenuity were not enough in the assault on old belief systems. Christianity had also to take into account why they were successful, what purpose they served, and then provide an alternative. Ancient rites were regarded as a guarantee of putting food on the table and corn in the fields. When the harvest failed and there was famine, the rites themselves were not blamed. People assumed they had not performed them correctly or wholeheartedly. By contrast, all the local priest had to offer was prayer and resignation to meet calamities. The notion that a supposedly just God hurled torments down was a difficult one to grasp. Original sin was too abstract. Some priests, in a church where central authority and discipline remained weak, tolerated the continuation of magic and superstition that allowed their occasionally bemused flock to take action in the face of adversity. The church was facing an enormous challenge, and it showed a tenacious strength and capacity to adapt. If one omnipotent God could never replace the supernatural powers, then the medieval church concentrated on Christ and his mother Mary in an attempt to put a human face on God and goodness. If one omnipotent God was inadequate and plain confusing when it came to dealing with the crises and disasters of life, Satan was waiting in the wings. People who had got used to blaming spirits for ill fortune did not easily grasp the notion of original sin. The devil provided an alternative part of the Christian canon, and his role grew beyond what the theologians might have wanted. The omnipotent God remained elusive, faceless, and the preserver of the thinkers, and the devil was stretched by clerics to cover many of the functions of the supernatural powers. Only with Satan as part of the package could God be accepted by communities as the Almighty. Before any such extension of the devil's domain could get underway, Christianity had to explain the Prince of Darkness to its converts. In the 5th and 6th centuries, St. Augustine's teachings trickled down to the Christian communities where their broad thrust had enormous influence. In their details, though, Augustine's thoughts often went over the heads of an ill-educated congregation, and their priest, too. Yet there was little in his writings to prompt the subsequent fear of a black-clad, half-man, half-beast with horns, a tail, and burning red eyes known as the devil. No artist's impression of the devil exists before the 6th century. The earliest depiction of Satan shows him clad not in black but in red, an angel standing before Christ in a mosaic in Ravenna which dates back to 520. It was to be the first of many, as the devil became the source of boundless fascination for Christians, and especially the artists and writers in their ranks. Mosaics, illustrations to accompany and explain learned books, stained glass windows, and sculptures all served in this period of illiteracy to teach and reinforce belief in the devil. He is everywhere, or rather he is represented everywhere by a menagerie of creatures associated with evil and malevolence. Few medieval artists represented Satan as a person. That came later. He was more often an imp or a grotesque combination of man and beast. Saints' lives, passed on by word of mouth by preachers and in the early manuscripts, were another popular way of explaining the ways and wiles of the devil to a general audience from the 6th century onward. In many of the tales, the villain was the devil, with the saintly hero reliving Christ's battle with Satan. Through such tales, the evil one became real and terrifying. Pope Gregory gave this recourse to the dead heroes of Christianity official blessing. Where Gregory led, others followed, and tales of saints proliferated. The devil was always the villain, but not always a menacing or sinister one. Anticipating the comedy of the medieval mystery plays, he was often shown as a fool. Gregory's popular diabology was enormously influential. It was he who first codified the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, anger, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust. In Gregory's age, all the ills of the world were being heaped at the devil's door, with a corresponding decline in human responsibility. It proved an inspired idea. As both a religious and a cultural yardstick, the 7 deadly sins remain with us today. The growth of monasticism in the 5th and 6th centuries contributed to the cult of saints and to the gloomy preoccupation with the devil. Monasticism in the Mediterranean basin was initially an experiment by solitary souls, eccentrics exasperated with the world, who went out into the sterile, bleak, and unyielding environment of the desert to relive Christ's struggle with Satan. They attracted disciples, and so the first monastic communities developed. According to legend, one of the pioneers, St. Anthony, who lived from 251 to 356, spent almost 90 years as a solitary, living first in a tomb and then in the Egyptian desert near Thebes. He never changed his clothing or washed his face, conserving all his energies for repeated confrontations with the devil. Anthony and other saints were raised to hero status by the Church in this period. The mark of goodness, of winning God's favor, had nothing to do with practicing the gospel virtues of loving your neighbor, being charitable, and attending the sacraments, but rather lay in one single feat, repulsing the devil. Desert monks who followed in Anthony's footsteps were not the only, or indeed the enduring, manifestation of monasticism. Other Christians, like St. Patrick, set sail from Ireland's shores to assist the spread of a distinctly Celtic form of monasticism throughout northern Europe. What both Egyptian and Celtic variations had in common was a suspicion of hierarchy and the trappings of church organization. Some monks were so hostile to the growing power of bishops and Rome that they fancied they saw a satanic plot unfolding there. St. Martin of Tours believed that the ecclesiastical authorities were working hand in hand with the devil. It was in response to such independence of mind and spirit that Gregory encouraged Benedict of Nursia to found an order of monks more willing to work with Rome. Benedict's rule proved immensely popular and continues to be so to this day. In its simplicity and lack of ornament, it proved attractive to young men and women in search of commitment in an unstable world. Fundamental to the missionary drive was the imperative to bring the sacraments to pagan people. Although Satan was so much a feature of this expansion across Europe, he had little more than a minor part in any of the Church's formal rituals. Only in the baptism ceremony was his malign influence formally mentioned. Immersion in water as a ritual ceremony had existed long before Christ. When he was baptized by his cousin John, it is thought that they were imitating a Jewish Essene rite of purification. The formalization of the practice within the Christian Church came from the 3rd century onward, when at Easter there would be a single ceremony in each church where groups of candidates or converts would be received. By the 7th century, the wording of the ceremony, especially of the questions asked of each candidate, had been set in stone. There were usually 7, like the 7 demons that Christ cast out of Mary Magdalene. The assumption of the ceremony, and one that continues to this day in the modern wording of the baptism ceremony, was that the candidate, be it he or she, newborn baby, child, or adult, was in the hands of Satan and hence needed to be exorcised. Exorcism during baptism is one of the earliest traceable forms of the ceremony, but it was a commonplace ritual. None of the sinister overtones that later ages attached to exorcism then existed. It was essentially a healing process, and could be as uncontroversial as genuflecting before an altar or crossing yourself in church, which in its own way is a form of exorcism. Exorcism was seen as a kind of ritual purification and cleansing to be pronounced over the sick, over food, and over drink. Even the line at the end of the Lord's Prayer, "Deliver us from evil," was regarded as a form of exorcism. The standard tools of exorcists were prayers, incense, salt, and holy oil. From the 4th century onward, however, fear of the devil and the awareness of original sin grew, and baptism became a frontline ceremony for combating Satan. By removing the stain of Adam's sin in the Garden of Eden from the souls of new recruits to the church, the devil too was being renounced. After all, he was the one who had led Adam astray. The Christianity that emerged dominant in the medieval period was altered by the battles and compromises it had endured. Theological debate around the figure of Satan slowed to a murmur after St. Augustine in the 5th century, and theologians had said all they wanted to say by the 13th century. The devil was left to the local communities, where he served as a readily understandable character, a face to put to the abstract reality of evil, and a sort of mediator, a method of assimilation between pagan ideas and the church. Satan became an essential bridge between local superstitions and the new Christianity of the missionaries. In the process, his position as God's opposite and equal was strengthened. In the struggle to reconcile an all-loving, all-giving, almighty creator with the existence of evil in the world, Christianity built up Satan throughout the first millennium as the crucial limiting factor on God's omnipotence. It continued publicly to insist on monism, that God is responsible for everything, but then muddied the waters by talk of a personal incarnate devil. Islam and Judaism, monotheistic creeds like Christianity, were more rigorous. They resisted the temptation to place any restraints on Allah's or Yahweh's power in order to preserve his goodness. Though the devil, called variously Iblis or Shaitan, features in the Quran and in Islamic doctrine, he is a minor irritant to both Allah and humankind, but nothing more. In Judaism, the focus is less on a personification of evil than on the evil inclination within each and every one. The key concept to Islam, indeed the literal meaning of the word, is surrender. Surrender to whatever Allah wills. Through punishment and being put to the test, humankind shows its love of Allah. Such trials may seem incomprehensible, but Allah had his reasons that will one day become apparent. In the meantime, the good Muslim will take whatever comes his or her way and have faith. The devil of the Quran has no power to make humanity commit evil deeds. The popular deities of Mecca at the time of Muhammad included the cult of three goddesses, Manat, Al-Lat, and Al-Uzza. The three goddesses in particular, sometimes called the daughters of Allah, are central to the most notorious text associated with the devil in Islam, the so-called satanic verses. In section 53 of the Quran, Muhammad is distraught that his people are so reluctant to understand the message that he is giving them from Allah. So he appeals to Allah for help, and is told that the intercession of the three goddesses might assist him. However, the Quran swiftly goes on to make clear that this guidance came to Muhammad not from Allah, but from elsewhere. There is no mention of satanic verses in the Quran. That version of events comes in the accounts of the 10th century historian Abu Ja'far at-Tabari.
Wow. I tell you, if this is not daytime radio in the night, if this is not college in the night, if this is not theological college in the night, I don't know what else is. Wow! What a lecture, man.
The cutting edge has been a source of enlightenment and upliftment for the youth. Parents, please follow suit.
The Cutting Edge on IRI FM with Mutabaruka.
Yes, we're there with you. You want to know if a program is number one in the night? Listen to what advertisement for the program. I don't believe, and I put my neck out there. There's no other program at this hours that carries so much advertisement. It's a serious thing. Therefore, the people that will put in the advertisement know that the people them is listening to the continent that after 1 something to 2, so much advertisement upon the program. Anyway, it's a serious tape. It's a serious tape, and the man said something about the devil being a non-being. There's a train of thought in a Buddhism that say it's better to say that God don't exist, that the same exists, because if you say God exists, you're going to attribute man's things and ways and this being. So it's better to say there's no God than to say there is a God, because whenever man says there is a God, what I'm trying to do now is make God become like man. So it's a really serious thinking. But I don't know if a whole people didn't know that. If you read the Bible, you know, say Paul, in the Bible, did believe that Jesus Christ was coming back in his time. So did most of the disciples. And I remember one time me and a man catch up in an argument when we had tell him, say, Jesus Christ stand up in front of some people and said, there's many here that shall not see death until the coming of the Son of Man. I don't know if them people are still alive. Them dead. There's many here that shall not see death until the Son of Man come. So there's a lot of people at them times there that actually believe, including Paul. They believe, say, him would have lived to see the coming, the return of the second return of Jesus Christ. Well, it's 2,000 years now gone, and we don't see no Jesus Christ a come. But the philosophy continue, the religion continue. But listening to this tape here, make me realize how strange it is that our whole belief system is guided by men of the past. And when we fight for these belief systems, we realize it's of no avail to fight over these belief systems, because all the things them that we believe in and we hold fast to was given to us by men before us. You know? And when we look at even the belief of Christianity as it is today, which was given to us by, you the man talk about Augustine, you the man talk about Plato, and many of the bishops there, Martin Luther, Constantine, all of these people, all of these men are men who utter the theory, and the theory becomes a testament for future references to be made. So we find, say, a lot of the belief system coming out of Christianity that people die for every day, all they are doing is echoing the thoughts of men like Augustine and men like Martin Luther. When we say Martin Luther, we don't mean Martin Luther King here. We talk about the German Martin Luther, who declared that the Rome was the seat of the mother of harlots. And it's very interesting to find and to realize that Christianity keep God invisible, but try to make Satan into a person or things, beings. Isn't it ironical? Christianity keeps God invisible, but try to make Satan into a person or a being. And when I say a being now, the manifestation, because when a man say God is a being, it's kind of stupid. It don't really make sense. You say God is a being and then say him invisible, because being connotates visibility, tangibility. A being connotates that. But Christianity keeps saying that God is invisible, but then Christianity turn around and try to make Satan visible. And that is why now they create these different looks of God. And then now we see the Protestants and even the Seventh-day Adventists come and try to put a face on God and Satan. Even though they couldn't put a face on God, they try to put a face on Satan. So what I am saying in the psychological thing is that, to me, it seems as if Christianity emphasizes the devil even as much and sometimes more than the idea of God. Because it is in the negativity of Christianity that God arises, and it's not in the positivity of God that the devil arises. You see, because what is happening now is that in Judaism, when something goes wrong, the Judaism don't blame it on the negativity of another opposing force. Judaism blame it on the person who is going through the negativity and claim that it is the wrongs that has been done by this person. God is now punishing these person or these people. When a famine come down upon the land, when locusts come down upon the land, when Israel go into bondage, it is not the triumph of the devil against God's children, but it is the lack of praise, the lack of listening, the lack of keeping the commandments by the Israelites that caused God to lead the children of Israel into what they call the negativity. What Christianity does now is create a new energy that purports to be the opposite of God, and then give that energy sometimes more power. Because if you hear the man saying that the devil killed Jesus, and Jesus no reciprocate now, not killing the devil, it is weird. I mean, if we listen to it and we get a fullness of it, is that the devil come upon the Son of God, and it is Christianity that is saying now the devil keep sweeping, which it don't say that, is that God give his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe him in should not perish but have everlasting life. So God kills him son, kill him own son. This is weird. God kill him own son for the sins of the world, which is not rectified up to now after 2,000 years. And then this son goes into hell and now fight against the devil and rise up back. And it says now that he conquers death. But he never get rid of the devil. He conquers death but not getting rid of the devil. So the devil is left to perform his evil and next day. So what happened now is that when Jesus rise, it also raise up the devil in the concept. And in the concept of good and evil, we see now that it is evil that is making itself manifest more today than the good. So people are now questioning, where is God in all of this evil that is made manifest on the earth? If God is so powerful and God is so almighty, how is it that evil seems to be dominating the lives of human beings so much? And it is not that man don't understand the concept, but there is a religious belief that perpetuates itself, that is giving this power over to an entity outside of man. It is saying that man is controlled and manipulated by an evil force outside of himself named the devil, and is given power also now to how are we going to rectify this evil force outside of ourselves. It is saying, oh, look into yourself and find God. So there's a kind of almost ambiguity that we have to live with when it comes on to this idea that the devil is seen as someone outside of you, but God is seen as someone inside of you. And in order to get rid of something outside of you, you have to look for something inside of you. It's a serious concept. It's a serious concept that has held and has it gripped the minds of people for centuries, and especially the Western mind in this concept of idea that, look here, man, I am going to create this concept of good, but I am giving it over to something outside of me. That people say, no, God is somewhere in the sky and the devil is somewhere under the earth. That is how we grew up. We grew up to believe, say, hell under the earth and heaven up in the sky. So when we start to balance ourselves, we realize, but there's something wrong. Why is it that we have to balance ourselves with evil? Well, we know that it's the actions that make things evil. And a man evil today can be good tomorrow, and a man good today can be evil tomorrow. So it's the action and not the individual himself, because the individual in religion is almost like a puppet. It's almost like a pawn that has been played in a greater game. It's almost like Judas. If you look at the concept of Judas in the Bible, why would Judas be condemned for something that was predestined to happen? That is a serious question. Why would you condemn Judas if he could not do anything about the situation that is going to arrive upon him because of previous prophecies? That this is what is going to happen. Whether I want to try to change it or not, him can't change it. It's predestined to happen. Judas is going to betray Jesus according to the prophecies. Now, if that is so, what is the judgment of Judas in relationship to his action that was predestined for him by this invisible force, this invisible energy? Why is Judas a wicked person? Why is Judas a betrayer? If all his actions relating to Jesus was predestined for him and he had no choice but to fulfill that destiny. Question. Theologian, would I like you to answer these things? People listening to the cutting edge at these hours, think about it. Think about it. If Jesus was destined to die for the sins of the world, Jesus is not a special person. More than all Jesus was doing was fulfilling a predestined concept and a predestined idea that was placed there for him. So whether him did want to do it or not, he was predestined to do it based upon how the perception goes in the religion. So there's no man who's working from his own authority based upon that idea. So really and truly, you cannot condemn a man for a wicked action if everything is predestined for man. Man is just like a breeze with intelligence. But all of these things is belief, brethren, and history, and all of these things is set there. Even now that that most people prepare now to celebrate Christmas, which everyone now knows and agree that no man named Jesus is born on the 25th of December, but refuse to give up this idea. What they do now is transform the day into something else, like Bush. Bush got to Iraq for weapons of mass destruction. He never find the weapons of mass destruction, so he transformed the idea of invasion into democratizing the Middle East, starting with Iraq, getting rid of a government. You cannot invade a country to get rid of a government. That is not the prerogative. That's not democracy. You invade a country to get rid of a government. So the first step was to say that you're going in the country for weapons of mass destruction. But you never find the weapons of mass destruction, so you turn it now into getting rid of a tyrant and transforming Iraq into democracy. That is exactly what we see Christians doing now, who is relating to Christmas. Now that we find out that Jesus Christ did not born on the 25th of December, what the Christians doing now is saying, all right, we know that Jesus Christ never born, but we turn it into a giving day, a family thing. You see? So they are transforming the same idea now into different, evolving the ideas, using the base of the same pagan idea and evolving it into new concepts, new idea. To 100 years from now, it might not be that. Just like how in America now, they refuse to say Merry Christmas. Them now saying Happy Holiday. That is how things are transformed by men. No God doing this thing, no divine intervention. Is men changing, reforming, evolving these things into different ideas and concepts. And that is how we must look at these things. We must look at it that some bishops sit down and transform the whole concept, the whole idea of Judaism into what they now call Christianity. And it's the same men them sit down again and take pagan ideas out of Rome and Europe and transform it into Christian ideas and mingle it and mix it and come out with what we have now. And men now fight and die for these beliefs that was instigated and put there by sometimes illiterate, sometimes murderers, sometimes cruel men, as we see in Henry VIII, who killed about 6 times, 7 times wife them, and then break away from Rome and form the Anglican Church, which is now the Church of England. You know, we can see Constantine, who boil him relative in hot oil, kill a whole heap of, I mean, these men who form these religions, man, and these ideas that we hold fast to, is some evil men. It's not some men that was ordained by no divine superpower. It's evil men sit down and fashion and create the concepts that we have now and hold fast to. Or we try to bob and weave into, like when a man read the New Testament and he might grab for what Paul mean, and Paul write a letter to the Timothy, and Paul write a letter to the Corinthians, and him take Paul letter like say the letter was written to him, and him start to turn the letter and twist the letter and use all sort of ideas that was formulated by the same guys them too. Because these same guys who form this thing, sometimes you believe says you are interpret the letter, you know, which is not really you are interpret the letter. It's really some other idea that pre-existed before you start to think about it. When you study the idea, it becomes a part of you. And then you start to now use that idea to evaluate and to rationalize what Paul did say and what he did mean and what he never say. And what he did think he did mean when he said that. That's like a man read Revelation and him don't even know say how him interpret Revelation is based upon a whole heap of other interpretation that it come to him, whether directly or indirectly. When the 7 day them tell you about, where Ellen G. White tell you about Daniel and Revelation, and she get that from Martin Luther. And Martin Luther, because of certain things we are going with in a film like a conclave and all these things, people don't realize a lot of our thinking is based upon our environment. That is why they have anthropology to study human behavior and its environment. Very important that we understand that this concept of the devil is the same concept like God. It's no different. It just try to show you the opposite. And all it really want to do is show you the different behavior in the human psyche. That's all it is all about. It is the behavior in the human psyche that is pushing the concept of the devil and the concept of God. There is no God in the sky and there's no devil under the earth. If you want to humanize the God and the devil, look in the mirror. That is a cliche by now. If you want to know who God is and who the devil is, look in the mirror. There is no devil under the earth and there's no God in the sky. There's no God in the sky that have a sun sitting up in the sky that is going to come and save the human beings. And there's no devil under the earth that is waiting for me to do something wicked, to burn me in a bottomless pit forever and ever with some fork. So we have to wake up to this consciousness and understand how we get tricked and get caught into it. And in all of that, there's nothing said about African religious retentions in all of that. Cutting edge RFM. Yeah, we have said to you that it's whole heap of levels out there we're supposed to understand. And because we don't try to understand it, we get caught in a whole heap of little craziness that them put out the way. So all we have said to the people them is that just watch what you do, watch what you think, especially at this time, yeah. Because sometimes people are saying, boy, right now, something like how me and the virgin that talk about the white Christmas thing a couple months ago, and he must say, boy, that now have nothing for doing nothing. Now we have said to him, but everything connect, you know, everything link. Sometimes you would have feel say it no link, but it link. And we have said, boy, if it link, just no say, no matter how simple it look and how weird it look, there is things out there that is connected that we need to evaluate and analyze, or else we are going to get touched in the very, very serious way. Yeah, we're going to get really ramjackled in a very serious way that we don't even know what liquid. And even now, you can't say it go on now. You can't say it go on now because look on how people realize and recognize things are right now. And we say why right now. Things not right. But everybody have a reason. I tell you, I say, this is why things not right, this is why things not right. But everything link up, you know. Everything link up. You man, I tell you why right now, and we say this all why the good old days. No, it's not the good old days because you can't sleep when you door open and them things. But then what? Who bring the people them in the age when it is not a good old days? What went wrong? Are you going to blame the youth them continuously for the things them happen now? Because there must have been something that was taking place in the good old days. The chain of command come down the stream. And there must have been something that is taking place in the good old days that don't allow the good old days to perpetuate itself in at this time. You understand? Something must have gone wrong. So we can't claim and say, why right now the good old days, when we realize but I know everything I go right. And if everything now go right now, something must have gone wrong in the good old days. Yes, something must have gone wrong in the good old days, Rasta. It couldn't just go good, it just go bad, so. And that's it. You know? You have to just recognize that. And we just have to tell the people them, it's good to understand where we are, where we're coming from. Especially in at this time, yeah. When you see things get so rugged and rough. Things get rugged and rough, and we are now, we have to put our hammer, battle. You understand? Like it's like we are going to war. Yeah, war we have to go to know. So we have to recognize the war that will take place. And know, say, if we not do something about it, we're going to spend another 2,000 years and try to figure out how the thing just change automatically. So when we create the thing. There's nothing that is placed there. Because as we go on, as we creating it, all of life, purpose and rationale is dependent on the living, not the dead. The dead is only there to remind us that they were alive. And we must respond to the living continuously.
The Cutting Edge on IRI FM with Mutabaruka.
Okay. Alright, because we are going here so now. But one of the people them know say Linton Kwesi Johnson will be at the Liberty Hall Center tonight. We have to say tonight now. Yeah, Linton Kwesi Johnson will be at the center tonight reading poetry. You know, Linton Kwesi Johnson is, I'm a brethren personally, poet extraordinaire, and just get a medal from the government of Jamaica. To glad to say them recognize a poet and the work where the poet contribute. You know, and Liberty Hall is a very small place too. So we don't know how it's going to work out. I think it's $500 for going. Liberty is a very small place. So come early. You have to go early, 6 o'clock. And I think they said there will be a reasoning there after the performance with Caroline Cooper. Yes. Who I say you love to Caroline Cooper. If we know so she sleep them over that thing. She not to cut in them over there. To cut in them over there. They want sleep. Yes, I have some people where listen. I have some people where can't listen. And right now, not part of Caroline Cooper's listening to her though. We know that. So we are say heal up all the people them who stay with me. And know say boy right now when them stay with me, them get some understanding and some knowledge of things where if them did not sleep, they would know it. Cutting Edge, IRI FM.